I'm Eleanor Vance, 34 years old, and I never thought I'd have to choose between my critically injured son and homelessness. My 7-year-old boy is lying unconscious in the ICU after his accident. That's when my sister Clarissa barged in with an ultimatum. Either I pay triple the rent, $6,800, or move out by the next morning. For 3 years, I'd been renting that duplex from her without a single issue. But now, with medical bills piling up and crushing me, she chose my darkest hour to strike. I didn't argue. I simply reached into my bag and handed her a black envelope, one document inside. It revealed the truth. And that was the moment everything changed. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to quietly reclaim your power from someone who always underestimated you. This might be the story you needed today. Clarissa and I, we were never what you'd call close. Growing up in a quiet suburb in Ohio, we were like night and day. She was 2 years my senior, the golden child, the spotlight in our parents' eyes. I was the afterthought. At least that's how it always felt. While we shared the same dark hair and piercing blue eyes, that's really where our similarities ended. From the beginning, Clarissa was my parents' pride and joy. My father, Arthur Vance, a man of rigid principles and an even more rigid definition of success, saw himself in her. Clarissa's ballet recitals, her piano concerts, her straight A's, they dominated every family conversation. My parents, Arthur and Martha Vance, never missed her performances, cheering loudly from the front row, beaming with a pride that seemed to fill the entire auditorium. My softball games, if they showed up at all, it was usually for the last inning, my father checking his watch every few minutes, a clear sign that his mind was already back on his business empire or Clarissa's latest triumph. Clarissa's just like me, he'd boast to friends and family, his chest puffed out. She's got that business sense, that drive. Meanwhile, my mother, Martha, bless her heart, would rush to Clarissa's defense when teachers called home about her bossy behavior or when neighborhood parents complained about her entitled attitude. Clarissa always had an answer, a way to spin things, and my mother would always believe her, or at least pretend to, protecting her precious firstborn from any hint of fault. I was the opposite, quiet, observant, artistic, and fiercely independent, born of necessity more than choice. By 14, I was babysitting every spare moment, meticulously saving to buy my own art supplies, the soft pastels and vibrant paints a solace and an escape from the unspoken favoritism that permeated our home. By 16, I had squirreled away enough from various odd jobs, dog walking, tutoring, working at the local ice cream shop, to buy my first car. It was a beaten-up Honda Civic, a faded blue relic that Clarissa refused to be seen in. "It's an embarrassment, Eleanor," she'd scoff, turning up her nose. My parents, in their own way, interpreted my self-reliance not as resilience, but as aloofness. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the constant, soul-crushing refrain of my childhood. What they failed to see, what they refused to acknowledge, was that Clarissa's confidence was a fragile thing, built entirely on their constant, unwavering validation, while mine grew, root by root, from surviving, thriving even, without it. College marked our first real separation, a much-needed breath of fresh air for me. Clarissa, as expected, attended our father's alma mater, an expensive private university known for its prestigious business program. She majored in business, of course, but from what I heard, she spent most of her time socializing, attending exclusive parties, and networking with the children of influential alumni. She seemed to glide through her degree on a wave of connections and effortless charm. I, on the other hand, won a full scholarship to California College of the Arts, a place where creativity wasn't just encouraged, it was celebrated. I studied graphic design, pouring my heart and soul into every project, every late-night studio session. To cover my living expenses and the mountain of art supplies, I worked 2 jobs, one at the campus library, another as a freelance web designer for small businesses. I barely slept, but I was happy. I was building something of my own, brick by brick, far away from the shadow of my sister and the subtle disapproval of my parents. After graduation, our paths diverged even further. I moved to Chicago, a city throbbing with energy and opportunity, and landed a junior designer position at a fast-paced agency. I worked relentlessly, building a reputation for myself as someone reliable, innovative, and deeply committed to their craft. I love the anonymity of the big city, the chance to be just Eleanor, not Clarissa's younger sister. Clarissa predictably moved back home to Ohio. She took a comfortable entry-level position at our father's company, a job I later learned was practically created for her. She lived rent-free in the family home, driving a brand new car, yet she constantly complained about her six-figure salary, always comparing it to the inflated incomes of her university friends. Her life seemed to be a perpetual state of mild dissatisfaction, despite its obvious comforts. Then, a seismic shift in our lives. Our parents died. My father, Arthur, from a sudden heart attack, an abrupt and shocking end for a man who had always seemed invincible. And my mother, Martha, just 8 months later, succumbed to a long, arduous battle with cancer. Their passing, while devastating, also revealed much about their financial situation, and by extension, their priorities. The reading of the will was a shock to both of us, but for vastly different reasons. While the sprawling family home, the expensive vacation properties, and most of the liquid assets, the vast majority of their considerable wealth, went directly to Clarissa, I discovered something unexpected. My father, in a rare moment of foresight, and perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of my independent nature, had established a trust for me. It could only be accessed when I turned 30. His note, tucked inside the trust documents, was simple, yet profound. Eleanor, you've always been responsible. This is to ensure you have security later in life, when you're ready for it. Clarissa was furious about the trust, despite receiving significantly, undeniably more upfront. Dad always said I'd get everything, she fumed during the reading, her voice shrill with indignation. This isn't fair. What's she going to do with a trust anyway? Probably wasted on some starving artist's dream. Her words stung, but I was too numb with grief and surprise to truly react. What neither Clarissa nor our parents knew, what they could never have imagined, was that I had been saving aggressively for years. Every freelance payment, every bonus, every penny I could spare from my modest but carefully managed income went into a separate private account. When my 30th birthday finally arrived, and I gained access to that trust, a substantial sum that could have easily allowed me to live comfortably for years, I didn't need it for day-to-day expenses. My freelance graphic design business was already flourishing, and I was financially stable. Instead, I saw an opportunity to build something lasting, something truly mine. I created an LLC, a limited liability company, and named it Vantage Holdings. I began looking for investment opportunities, specifically in real estate. I'd always been intrigued by the stability and potential growth of property, a stark contrast to the volatile creative industries I often worked in. And that's when fate, in its often ironic way, truly intervened. The property management company that had been handling our parents' rental properties for years, including the very duplex where Clarissa now lived in one unit, and where I would eventually move into the other, announced they were selling the entire portfolio. Clarissa, who, true to form, had blown through much of her inheritance on impulsive luxury vacations, ill-conceived business ventures that collapsed almost as soon as they began, and a general disregard for financial planning, couldn't afford to buy them. She grumbled about the sale, complaining about the new, faceless corporate landlords she expected to take over. Through my LLC, Vantage Holdings, I purchased the entire portfolio, every single property, including the duplex. No one connected me to Vantage. I used my lawyer, Jonathan Hayes, a shrewd but ethical man whom I'd met through a pro bono Art for Charity initiative, as the public face of the acquisition. Jonathan handled all the paperwork, the negotiations, the transfer of deeds. Clarissa, completely oblivious, assumed the properties had been sold to some large, impersonal corporation from out of state. And I saw absolutely no reason to correct her. Why keep it secret? The answer was simple, yet profound, born from a lifetime of experience with my sister. I knew Clarissa. If she discovered I owned the buildings, she'd expect special treatment. Missed payments would suddenly become family favors. Maintenance issues would become, Eleanor, can you just fix this for me? The professional landlord-tenant relationship, one built on clear boundaries and mutual respect, would disintegrate into the familiar, toxic dynamic of our childhood, where I was expected to accommodate her every whim, every crisis. So, I maintained the illusion. I kept the secret. She believed she was dealing with a management company, not her sister. And in that, for a time, I found a strange kind of peace. Meanwhile, my personal life had taken several turns, some wonderful, some devastating. I met Ryan Sterling at a charity gala in Chicago, a whirlwind romance in a city that had always felt too fast, too impersonal. He was tall, charming, devastatingly handsome, and seemingly successful in finance. Our connection was immediate, intense. Within a year, we were married, and 9 months later, our beautiful son, Leo, arrived, filling our lives with an unimaginable joy. For a while, everything seemed perfect. A perfect family, a perfect life, a clean slate. But Ryan's charm, I soon discovered, masked serious flaws. His successful career was largely fabricated. He moved from job to job, getting fired for poor performance, unethical violations, or simply disappearing when the pressure mounted. When Leo was just 3 years old, still navigating the world with wide-eyed wonder, I discovered the true extent of Ryan's deception. He had racked up massive gambling debts, a secret addiction he'd hidden meticulously, and had been systematically stealing from our joint accounts to feed it. He drained our savings, mortgaged assets I didn't even know we owned. The betrayal was a physical blow, worse than any lie. The divorce was ugly, drawn out, and emotionally draining. Ryan fought for custody, not because he wanted to be a father to Leo. He barely acknowledged his existence, but because he knew child support would come from my steadily growing income, my flourishing design business. When the judge, seeing through his transparent charade, awarded me full custody with Ryan granted only supervised visitation, he stopped showing up altogether. His last meager child support payment came 2 years ago. Then he simply disappeared, relocating somewhere in Texas without a trace, leaving me to pick up the pieces, shattered but determined to protect Leo. Through all this, through the pain of divorce, the financial recovery, and the challenges of single parenthood, I never told Clarissa about my true financial situation, about the quiet empire I was building. She still saw me as the struggling artist younger sister, the one who always figured it out but never truly soared. When Leo and I needed a fresh start, a quieter life away from the demanding pace of Chicago, and the painful memories of Ryan, my thoughts turned back to Ohio, to the duplex. I approached Clarissa with a proposition. I'd rent the vacant unit in the duplex where she lived, a steady source of income for her as my supposed landlord. She agreed eagerly, almost suspiciously so, likely seeing it as another opportunity to lord something over me, to feel important and in control. The arrangement worked, surprisingly well, for 3 years. I paid rent on time every single month to the management company. They, in turn, took their small fee for administrative services and then secretly sent the vast majority of it back to me, the true owner, Vantage Holdings. I essentially paid rent to myself. Beyond that, I maintained the property at my own expense, under the guise of being an unusually invested tenant. I'd update the kitchen, fix leaky faucets, repair the fence, all while Clarissa took credit for being a generous landlord to her friends, never questioning why a tenant would spend their own money on owner responsibilities. All the while, I continued building my remote graphic design business, creating compelling brands for clients nationwide, quietly flourishing while raising Leo in the quiet suburb where we'd grown up. Life wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was stable. It was ours, until it wasn't, until that Tuesday in April. As I sat in that sterile hospital room, watching machines breathe for my son, my world carefully constructed brick by brick, foundation by foundation, was about to collide head-on with Clarissa's latest crisis. I should have seen it coming. Clarissa's problems, her self-inflicted wounds, always had a way of becoming everyone else's emergency. By my 34th birthday, I had established a comfortable routine. My graphic design business had grown enough that I could be selective about clients, working remotely from my home office. Leo, my curious, energetic boy, attended the local elementary school. Each morning, I'd walk him to the bus stop at the end of our street, his Spider-Man backpack bouncing as he skipped alongside me, chattering endlessly about dinosaurs, space, or whatever his current obsession was. He had my artistic eye, my innate curiosity, but none of my childhood shyness. At 7, he was all boundless energy and imagination, building elaborate Lego structures, sketching his own intricate comic books, and making friends wherever he went. His teachers constantly praised his creativity and kindness. traits I'd worked hard to nurture in him. "Mom, do you think I could be an astronaut and an artist?" he'd ask regularly, his big blue eyes, so like Clarissa's and mine, serious beneath his mop of unruly brown hair. "You can be anything you put your mind to, my love," I'd always answer, determined that my son would never question his worth or potential the way I had growing up. Co-parenting with Ryan was non-existent. After the divorce, his calls became infrequent, then stopped altogether. His child support checks, always late, eventually ceased when he moved to Texas without providing a forwarding address. Leo occasionally asked about his father, his voice tinged with a child's quiet longing, but the questions grew less frequent as time passed, replaced by new obsessions and the joy of our everyday life. My heart broke watching him scan the fathers at school events, a fleeting shadow of disappointment crossing his face, but I poured all my love into being both parents for him. He was my world. Our life in the duplex was peaceful, a quiet haven. My side had 3 bedrooms, one for each of us, and my dedicated home office, with a small fenced backyard where Leo could play freely. I'd invested significantly in renovating my unit when we moved in, updating the kitchen and bathrooms, transforming it into a bright, functional space under the pretense of being an unusually invested tenant. Clarissa, living in the attached unit, would occasionally drop by unannounced, usually to brag about a new, extravagant purchase or complain endlessly about her latest boyfriend troubles, oblivious to my underlying ownership. My closest friend in town was Sophia Miller, a kindergarten teacher I'd reconnected with after moving back. She lived a few blocks away and often joined us for movie nights or helped with Leo when I had pressing deadlines. Our neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a widowed retiree with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, became something of a grandfather figure to Leo, patiently teaching him about gardening and the intricate mechanics of fixing bicycles. Our little world was small, but it was solid. Tuesday, April 14th. It began like any other day. I made Leo chocolate chip pancakes, a weekly tradition he adored. We went over his homework, his little brow furrowed in concentration over a math problem. Then I walked him to the bus stop. Before he boarded, he gave me his usual fierce hug, smelling of maple syrup and sunshine, and said, "Love you to Pluto and back, Mom." I watched until the bus, a bright yellow box of childhood dreams, turned the corner at the end of the street, never imagining it would be the last normal moment we'd have for months to come. At 1:42 p.m., my phone rang. The school's number lit up my screen. My stomach dropped immediately, a cold, sickening plunge. Schools don't call in the middle of the day with good news. "Miss Vance?" The voice belonged to Principal Thompson, tight with controlled urgency. "There's been an accident during recess. Leo, he fell from the climbing structure. The paramedics are here now." The world tilted sideways. The vibrant colors of my home office drained to a muted gray. I remember grabbing my keys and purse, not bothering to shut down my computer or lock the front door. The mundane concerns of everyday life suddenly utterly meaningless. I drove to the school on autopilot, my hands shaking so violently on the steering wheel that the car swerved slightly. I prayed, desperately, silently, to anyone who would listen. When I arrived, an ambulance was already pulling away, sirens blaring, a horrifying wail that ripped through the quiet afternoon. Principal Thompson intercepted me in the parking lot, her face ashen. "They're taking him to Ohio Children's Medical Center," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "He hit his head. He hasn't regained consciousness." The next hours passed in a blur of terror, following the ambulance through traffic, the flashing lights a cruel beacon leading me to a nightmare. The emergency room's controlled chaos, a cacophony of hushed voices, frantic footsteps, and the relentless beeping of machines. Doctors asking questions I struggled to answer through my panic. Words like traumatic brain injury, intracranial pressure, and induced coma bounced off me like hailstones, each one a hammer blow to my heart. My mind refused to grasp their meaning, unable to compute such horrors in relation to my vibrant, bouncing boy. Dr. Julian Vance, the pediatric neurologist assigned to Leo's case, finally provided some semblance of clarity in the desolate waiting room. His kind eyes, serious behind wire-rimmed glasses, offered a glimmer of human warmth in the sterile coldness. "Leo has suffered a significant head trauma," he explained gently, his voice measured. There's swelling in his brain, and we've placed him in a medically induced coma to give his brain time to heal. We'll need to perform surgery to relieve the pressure. Will he? I couldn't finish the question. The words choked in my throat, swallowed by a wave of nausea and dread. Would he live? Would he be okay? The next 72 hours are critical, Dr. Vance said, placing a steady, comforting hand on my shoulder. Leo is young and otherwise healthy, which works in his favor. But I want to be honest with you. We're looking at a serious situation. They allowed me to see him before surgery. My vibrant, energetic boy, who just hours ago had been chattering about astronauts and dinosaurs, lay utterly still, tubes and wires snaked from his small body, connecting him to machines that beeped and hissed, a relentless, terrifying rhythm of life support. His small face was swollen and bruised, nearly unrecognizable. I held his limp hand, so tiny, so cold, making promises I wasn't sure I could keep. You're going to be okay, baby. Mom's here. I'm not going anywhere. My voice was a shaky whisper, barely audible above the hum of the machines. The surgery lasted 4 agonizing hours. Sophia arrived halfway through, a beacon of practical comfort, bringing me coffee and a change of clothes. She sat silently beside me, a comforting presence, as I stared at the waiting room clock, each tick an eternity. Mr. Henderson called hourly for updates, his voice thick with concern. Even my clients, notified by my hastily set-up email autoresponder, sent messages of support, a testament to the community I had quietly built around myself. After surgery, Dr. Vance returned, his expression cautiously optimistic. We've relieved the pressure successfully. Now we wait and monitor. The ICU became my new home. I slept, if you could call it that, in a stiff reclining chair beside Leo's bed, leaving only to shower quickly in the hospital's sterile family room. Days blurred together, marked only by nurse shift changes and doctor rounds. The medical bills began arriving even before Leo's condition truly stabilized. Insurance covered portions, but left thousands in out-of-pocket expenses that quickly drained my carefully built emergency fund. Every bill was a fresh reminder of the immense financial burden crushing me, on top of the emotional weight. Through it all, Clarissa was notably absent. I'd left her a voicemail the night of the accident, a choked message explaining what had happened, but she hadn't responded. Not unusual for her, sadly, when someone else's crisis didn't directly benefit her. I was too focused on Leo, on willing him back to me, to chase her down. By the 5th day, Leo's condition had stabilized somewhat, but remained critical. He hadn't woken up yet, but the doctors were slowly reducing his sedation, hoping for signs of consciousness. I was talking softly to him, telling him about a squirrel I'd seen on the hospital grounds, an attempt to bring a piece of the outside world into his dark, quiet one, when the ICU door swung open. Clarissa stood there, designer handbag over her arm, not a hair out of place. After nearly a week of her nephew fighting for his life, she'd finally made an appearance. But something in her expression, a certain tightness around her mouth, a subtle predatory glint in her eyes, told me this wasn't a compassionate visit. We need to talk, she said, her voice flat, barely glancing at Leo's still form, seemingly dismissing the very real, terrifying battle he was fighting. About the property, Clarissa's timing couldn't have been worse. I'd been awake for nearly 36 hours straight, leaving Leo's side only for quick, desperate bathroom breaks. My hair was pulled back in a messy, haphazard ponytail, and I was wearing the same hospital gift shop sweatpants for the 2nd day in a row, stained with spilled coffee and forgotten tears. Meanwhile, Clarissa looked like she'd just stepped out of a high-powered business meeting, her tailored blazer crisp, her pearl earrings gleaming. "Can't this wait?" I asked, my voice hoarse from exhaustion, from crying, from talking to a boy who couldn't answer. Leo's condition is still critical. Clarissa glanced at my son's unconscious form, her expression softening momentarily, a flicker of something almost human. "He looks stable enough," she mumbled, before perching on the edge of the visitor chair, placing her designer bag carefully, fastidiously, away from any hospital equipment. "I'm sorry about Leo, really," she said, her tone devoid of genuine emotion, a rehearsed platitude. "Kids are resilient, though. I'm sure he'll bounce back." Her casual dismissal of my son's life-threatening condition, her flippant assumption of his recovery, made my jaw clench so tight I thought my teeth would shatter. but I'd long ago learned that engaging with Clarissa's insensitivity only encouraged it, fueled her need for drama and control. "What about the property?" I prompted, wanting to get whatever this was over with so I could return my full, undivided attention to Leo. Clarissa crossed her legs, a picture of false nonchalance, and smoothed her skirt, her manicured nails catching the fluorescent light. "Well, Eleanor, there's no easy way to say this, but I'm going to need to raise your rent." She said it with the same tone someone might use to announce a slight change in dinner plans, completely detached from the weight of her words, from the reality of my situation. I stared at her. "Now? You want to discuss rent while Leo is in intensive care?" "It's unfortunate timing," she conceded with a shrug, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "But business is business, Mel." She still called me Mel, a childhood nickname that grated on my nerves, a constant reminder of the past I was trying to outrun. "How much of an increase?" I asked, though something in her demeanor, a calculating glint, told me I wasn't going to like the answer. She examined her manicure, turning her hand this way and that, before finally meeting my eyes, a smirk playing on her lips. "I'm tripling it. Starting next month, it'll be $6,800. The number hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut. My current rent was $2,200. It was already slightly above market value for the area, but I had never complained, knowing full well where the money ultimately went. But $6,800, that was completely unreasonable, utterly exorbitant, especially with the mounting, suffocating medical bills that were already draining every last cent of my emergency fund. That was a figure designed to break me. "That's impossible," I said, my voice barely a whisper, then strengthening with indignation. "You know that's not market rate for the area. Why would you—" "The market is whatever I say it is, Eleanor," Clarissa interrupted, her voice snapping with a sudden harshness. "It's my property and I need the money. If you can't pay, you need to be out by tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow? That's not legal. Tenant law requires—" "I don't care what's legal," she snapped, making air quotes around the word legal as if it were an irrelevant technicality. "I have expenses, Eleanor. Major expenses that have come up suddenly." I studied my sister's face, truly studied it. I recognized the tightness around her eyes, the slight, almost imperceptible twitch in her left cheek. Signs I'd seen countless times before, signals that she was in deep financial trouble, the kind of trouble she couldn't charm or sweet-talk her way out of. "What did you do this time?" I asked quietly, my voice low, not wanting to disturb Leo or alert the nurses to our increasingly tense, volatile conversation. Clarissa's composure cracked slightly, just a hairline fracture. "Nothing. Well, I made some investments that didn't work out as planned." Her eyes darted nervously to the door. "Investments? Like your investment in your ex-boyfriend's artisanal grilled cheese food truck that disappeared overnight? Or your highly speculative investment in that obscure cryptocurrency that crashed faster than a lead balloon?" My words were laced with a bitterness I rarely allowed myself to show, a lifetime of suppressed resentment finally bubbling to the surface. Her cheeks flushed with anger, a crimson stain spreading up her neck. "You think you're so perfect, don't you, little Eleanor? Who always did everything right? Well, not all of us can be so boring and responsible." The conversation was devolving, as it often did with Clarissa, into old familiar patterns of recrimination and personal attacks. I took a deep breath, trying to recenter myself, to remember why I was there. I tried a different approach, a plea to whatever sliver of humanity might still reside in her. "Clarissa, even if I wanted to pay that amount, I can't. Look around you." I gestured vaguely to the hospital room, to the machines, to Leo. Leo's medical bills are already in the tens of thousands. Insurance isn't covering everything. I'm barely keeping my head above water as it is. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of empathy in her eyes, a shadow of genuine concern, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar, impenetrable coldness. "That's not my problem," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I need the money. Either pay up or get out. Your choice." A memory flashed through my mind, vivid and sharp. Clarissa at 10 years old, holding my favorite doll hostage, demanding I give her my dessert for a week if I wanted it back. Something's never changed, I thought, a bitter taste in my mouth. "What exactly happened, Clarissa?" I pressed, leaning forward slightly. "This isn't just about bad investments, is it?" Clarissa's facade cracked further. She glanced nervously at the door, then lowered her voice, barely a whisper. Fine, if you must know. I've got some gambling debts, significant ones. To people who don't I need more time for an answer. Ah, there it was, gambling. Clarissa had always had a weakness for casinos, starting with weekend trips to Atlantic City in her 20s, chasing the thrill of easy money. It seemed the occasional indulgence had escalated, metastasized into something far more sinister, far more desperate. How much do you owe? I asked, my stomach tightening with a fresh wave of anxiety, not for myself, but for the precariousness of our shared reality. Enough that I need your rent tripled, she snapped, her voice rising again. The details aren't your business. They are if you're making your problem my problem, I countered, my own voice surprisingly steady, especially when it affects my son's stability during a medical crisis. Clarissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Look, I don't have time to debate this, Eleanor. It's $1,800 by the 1st of next month or eviction. Those are your options. I've already listed the unit online, in case you decide to be difficult about this. The audacity was breathtaking, even for Clarissa. As she paced the small hospital room, her expensive shoes clicking on the floor, I thought about all the times throughout our lives when her problems had become everyone else's emergency. The family vacation canceled because Clarissa failed 3 classes and needed summer tutoring. My college graduation party, meticulously planned by my mother, becoming an impromptu celebration of Clarissa's new entry-level job instead. My parents missing Leo's birth because Clarissa had a messy breakup and needed them more, always. Always I had been expected to understand, to accommodate, to put my needs last. It was the unspoken family rule. Clarissa's crisis trumped everything. As I watched her now, checking her reflection in the window of Leo's hospital room, adjusting her hair while my son fought for his life, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of patience and understanding, of quiet sacrifice, hardened into an unyielding resolve. The weight of years of unspoken grievances, of being the ignored one, the responsible one, the one who always had to bend, finally reached a breaking point. So that's it, I asked, my voice steadier than I expected, cool and calm in the face of her rage. Your gambling debts are more important than your nephew's recovery? Than your sister having a stable home during a family emergency? Clarissa had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but only for a moment. Her shoulders slumped, then squared. Don't be so dramatic, Eleanor. Leo will recover, and you'll figure something out. You always do. Once she picked up her bag, a clear signal that she was done, that she had delivered her blow and was leaving. She headed for the door. I need an answer by tomorrow, $6,800, or you're out. As she reached for the door handle, her back to me, I made a decision. A decision that had been simmering unconsciously for years, but solidified in that moment of ultimate betrayal. For years, I'd protected Clarissa from consequences. I'd maintained our charade, her illusion of control, to spare her pride and preserve what little fragile relationship we had. But watching her walk away from Leo's bedside, her only concern her financial demands, not a shred of genuine concern for her nephew's life, I realized the time for protection was over. The time for truth had arrived. Wait, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the air, stopping her cold. She turned, impatience written across her face, her brows furrowed in annoyance. What? I have something for you, I replied. I reached into my worn leather tote bag, the same bag that had been sitting there untouched for days, containing the meager essentials I'd hastily grabbed when the school called. Beneath my wallet, my phone charger, and a half-eaten granola bar was the sleek, black envelope. I always kept it with me, not out of expectation, but out of preparation, a quiet, subconscious readiness for this very moment. Clarissa watched with narrowed eyes as I slowly, deliberately pulled out the envelope. Her foot tapped impatiently on the linoleum floor. If this is a check, it better be for the full amount, she said, extending her hand, her tone condescending. I didn't immediately give her the envelope. Instead, I looked at Leo. Tubes running from his small body, a breathing tube taped to his mouth, connecting him to the life-giving machine. The rhythmic beep of monitors, the only sound indicating his fragile life. Then I looked back at my sister, truly seeing her, perhaps for the first time. Not just the entitled, self-absorbed woman before me, but the little girl who had once been my playmate, my co-conspirator in innocent games, before our parents' differential treatment drove a wedge between us, slowly but irrevocably. "You know," I said softly, my voice laced with a quiet sadness that belied the fury beneath, "I've spent my entire life trying to understand you, Clarissa, making excuses for your behavior, shouldering the burden of our relationship, the emotional labor, the constant forgiveness. Even now, with Leo fighting for his life, clinging to every breath, I'm still doing emotional labor for you." Clarissa rolled her eyes, her impatience reaching a peak. "Spare me the therapy talk, Eleanor, and just give me your answer. Are you paying or leaving?" I stood up slowly, my body stiff from days in the hospital chair, my muscles aching. Even standing, I felt small next to Clarissa, in her expensive heels, her posture radiating confidence. But for once, I didn't feel diminished by the difference. I felt strong. "Here's my answer," I said, holding her gaze, and handed her the black envelope. Clarissa snatched it, likely expecting a bank check, perhaps a last-ditch plea for mercy. Her French manicured nails broke the seal with a faint tearing sound, and she pulled out the contents, several legal documents, official seals, and signatures prominently displayed. "What is this?" she asked, confusion slowly replacing her smugness. Her brow furrowed, a tiny crease appearing between her perfectly plucked eyebrows. "Property deeds," I replied calmly, my voice steady, betraying none of the triumphant anticipation bubbling within me. "And ownership records." Her eyes scanned the first page, then widened dramatically. She flipped to the next document, her movements becoming increasingly frantic, her hands trembling. This says Vantage Holdings owns the duplex and the other properties, but that's not possible. The management company told me." "Vantage Holdings is my company, Clarissa," I said quietly, letting the words hang in the air, allowing their full weight to settle upon her. "I've owned the entire portfolio of properties for 5 years now, including the duplex where you live, where we both live." The color drained completely from Clarissa's face. It was as if all the blood had suddenly left her head. She looked at the documents again, then at me, then back at the papers, as if hoping the words would magically rearrange themselves, that this was some cruel joke, some elaborate mistake. "That's not... You can't. Dad left those properties to be managed by... Dad left you liquid assets and me a trust, Clarissa," I corrected gently but firmly. "When the management company decided to sell the portfolio, you couldn't afford to buy it. But I could, through my LLC." Clarissa sank into the visitor's chair, the papers trembling violently in her hands. The shock was palpable. "So all this time, when I thought I was your landlord, you were actually my tenant?" I confirmed it. "Yes, I kept up the arrangement because it seemed to make you happy, Clarissa, thinking you had some power over me. And honestly, it was simpler than dealing with the fallout of you knowing the truth. The rent payments went to the management company, which took their fee and passed the rest to Vantage Holdings. To me, I essentially paid rent to myself, while maintaining the illusion that you were in charge." Clarissa's shock was rapidly giving way to something else. A deep, furious anger. Her cheeks flushed red, then mottled. Her eyes narrowed. "This is a trick. You're lying." "Call Jonathan Hayes," I suggested, naming my attorney. "His number is on the documents. He handles all Vantage Holdings legal matters. He'll confirm everything." So, as the reality of the situation, the full crushing weight of my quiet, strategic reversal of fortunes sank in, Clarissa's expressions cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, a raw, undeniable fear. "So what now?" she asked, her voice smaller, weaker than I'd heard it in years, stripped of its usual bravado. "Are you going to evict me? Is this your revenge?" I shook my head slowly, deliberately. "No, Clarissa, I'm not you. I don't use housing as a weapon against family members." Before Clarissa could respond, the door to Leo's room opened, and Sarah Jenkins, Leo's night nurse, entered. She glanced between us, immediately sensing the suffocating tension in the air, her experienced eyes taking in Clarissa's disheveled distress and my own exhaustion. "Everything okay in here?" she asked, her voice firm but kind. "We're just finishing a family discussion," I assured her, offering a weak smile. My words were true in a way. "Well, I need to check Leo's vitals and change his IV," Sarah said firmly, gesturing subtly toward the door. Maybe you could continue your conversation outside. Clarissa stood abruptly, still clutching the damning documents. Her usual poise had completely deserted her. We're done here anyway, she mumbled, her voice barely audible, defeated. She moved toward the door, then stopped, and turned back, her eyes flashing with a last, desperate defiance. This isn't over, Eleanor. Actually, it is, I replied evenly, calmly. My voice was quiet, but it carried an undeniable authority I hadn't possessed minutes before. You have until the end of the month to decide if you want to stay as my tenant, paying the fair market rate of $2,200, or find somewhere else to live. Your choice. Clarissa's mouth opened, as if to argue, to protest, but no words came out. She just stared at me, then at the documents in her hand, then back at me, as if seeing me for the very first time. Then she stormed out the door. It swung shut behind her with a soft click, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. Sarah raised an eyebrow, a knowing look on her face. Family, I said, by way of explanation, a wry, tired smile touching my lips. She hummed knowingly as she went about checking Leo's monitors. Family can be the biggest blessing and the biggest challenge all at once, she observed. I sat back down beside Leo's bed, taking his small, warm hand in mine. The confrontation had left me utterly drained, exhausted to my core, but also strangely, profoundly liberated. For the first time in our adult lives, Clarissa and I saw each other clearly, without the distorting lens of our childhood roles, without the pretense. As Sarah worked efficiently around us, her movements calm and practiced, I leaned close to Leo's ear and whispered, "It's just you and me against the world, buddy, and we're stronger than anyone knows." Don't. I had no idea then that our strength would be tested even further before the night was through. The calm after Clarissa's dramatic exit lasted exactly 43 minutes. I was dozing fitfully in the chair beside Leo's bed, my hand still resting on his, finding what little comfort I could in his continued presence, however fragile. Then, without warning, the monitor above his bed suddenly erupted in a cacophony of alarms. Sharp, insistent beeps that pierced the quiet of the room. Leo's tiny body went rigid, then began to convulse violently, a seizure. "Seizure!" Sarah shouted, her voice echoing with controlled urgency, hitting the emergency call button while simultaneously lowering Leo's bed to a flat position. The room flooded with medical personnel within seconds. A flurry of hurried movements and hushed commands. Someone gently but firmly pulled me away from the bed as the team worked on my son. A whirlwind of skilled hands and focused determination. Dr. Julian Vance arrived moments later, his usually calm demeanor replaced by an intense, rapid-fire focus. He barked orders as he assessed Leo. "BP's dropping," one nurse called out. O2 sat down to 82, another reported. "We need to intubate now," Dr. Vance decided, his voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. "Get OR3 ready, we're going back in." I stood pressed against the wall, my hands clamped over my mouth, watching helplessly, paralyzed by a fresh wave of terror as they prepared to rush Leo back to surgery. As they unlocked the bed's wheels, preparing to move him, Dr. Vance approached me, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "The intracranial pressure has increased suddenly, Eleanor," he explained, his eyes piercing mine with a desperate sincerity. "We need to operate immediately to relieve it." But he was stable, I whispered, my voice choked with tears, barely audible. "You said he was stable." "With brain injuries, conditions can change rapidly, unexpectedly," he said, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder, a gesture meant to ground me. "I need your consent for emergency surgery." I signed the forms without fully seeing them, my vision blurred by tears that streamed uncontrollably down my face. My hand shook so violently I could barely scrawl my name. As they wheeled Leo away, his little body disappearing down the hallway, Dr. Vance paused. "We'll do everything we can," he promised, his voice filled with a quiet conviction before following the team down the hall. I was left alone in the suddenly, deafeningly quiet room. The beeping machines, the rumpled sheets, they were all evidence of Leo's presence, but there was no Leo. The absence was deafening. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in shock, numb with despair, before Sophia burst in. She was still wearing her classroom clothes, a bright, cheerful pattern that now seemed shockingly out of place against the grim reality of the hospital. Concern was etched across her face, her eyes wide with fear. "Eleanor, I came as soon as I got your text," she said, though I had no memory of texting her. I must have done it on autopilot while signing those dreadful consent forms. When I couldn't respond, Sophia knelt before me, taking my ice-cold hands in hers. "Eleanor, Melanie, what happened?" "They took him back to surgery," I managed, my voice distant, alien to my own ears. "His brain, the pressure, he was seizing." Sophia wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a tight embrace, and something broke inside me, the dam of composure I'd maintained for days. Through the accident, the first surgery, the endless, agonizing waiting, even through Clarissa's cruel ultimatum, finally crumbled. I sobbed into Sophia's shoulder, raw, guttural cries that seemed to come from somewhere beyond myself, from a place of primal grief and terror. "He can't die," I gasped between sobs, my voice ragged, desperate. "He's all I have. He's everything." "He's not going to die," Sophia said firmly, holding me tighter, though we both knew she had no power to make such promises. "He's a fighter, Eleanor, just like his mom." Time lost all meaning in that waiting room. Sophia somehow got me to the surgical floor, where we sat side by side on uncomfortable plastic chairs, under the harsh fluorescent lights. She brought me water I couldn't drink, food I couldn't eat. The clock on the wall seemed to move at half speed, each minute stretching into an eternity, a cruel mockery of my racing heart. 3 hours into the wait, I caught a glimpse of Clarissa in the hospital lobby, through the waiting room's glass doors. She was speaking with the man in a suit, her latest lawyer, I assumed, probably discussing her gambling debts. When she saw me watching, she quickly turned away, her head held high, heading for the exit. Not even a glance in our direction. Even now, with her nephew fighting for his life, her priorities were clear, stark, and utterly self-serving. A strange calm settled over me then, a cold, hard resolve. If Leo survived, when Leo survived, things would be different. No more accommodating toxic relationships. No more prioritizing peace over health, or emotional comfort over core boundaries. No more allowing Leo to believe that the way Clarissa treated us, the way she treated the world, was normal or acceptable. Dr. Julian Vance finally emerged after 4.5 agonizing hours. Still in his surgical scrubs, looking utterly exhausted but not defeated. A distinction I'd learned to recognize in the weary faces of medical professionals. "We've managed to reduce the pressure," he said, sitting heavily beside me, his voice rough with fatigue. "We had to remove a small portion of skull to allow room for the swelling. It sounds dramatic, I know, but it's a standard procedure for this situation." "And?" I pressed, needing the bottom line, needing desperately to hear the words that would allow me to breathe again. My heart pounded against my ribs, a trapped bird. "And he's stable," Dr. Vance continued, his voice more reassuring now. "More stable than before. The next 48 hours will be critical. We'll keep him in a medically induced coma to give his brain the maximum chance to heal, but he'll wake up eventually. Will he be okay?" I couldn't stop myself from asking the question that had haunted me since the very first surgery, the question that lurked in the darkest corners of my mind. Dr. Vance didn't offer false comfort. He was honest, brutally so. "Brain injuries are unpredictable, Eleanor. Some patients recover fully, others partially, some have lasting effects. It's too soon to know where on that spectrum Leo will fall." I nodded, appreciating his honesty even as it terrified me to my core. "Can I see him?" I asked, desperate to be near him, to touch him. "He's in recovery now. Once he's settled back in ICU, the nurse will come get you." When Dr. Vance left, Sophia insisted I eat something, anything. She guided me to the cafeteria, a fluorescent-lit cavern, and placed a sandwich and an apple juice in front of me. I managed a few mechanical bites, tasting nothing, the food a bland paste in my mouth. "You need to keep your strength up, Eleanor," she reminded me gently, her eyes full of compassion. "Leo is going to need you at full capacity when he wakes up. When, not if." The word choice wasn't lost on me. It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. Back in the ICU waiting room, as the hours crawled by, Sophia finally addressed what she'd obviously been wondering. "I saw Clarissa leaving earlier. Did she actually come to support you?" I gave a hollow laugh, a dry, rasping sound. Not exactly. I filled her in on Clarissa's cruel ultimatum, on the tripling of the rent, and then the bombshell. My revelation about the property ownership, the black envelope, the pale face. Sophia's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. You've owned the duplex this entire time, and she never knew? I kept it quiet for simplicity's sake, I explained, the words tumbling out. To avoid exactly this kind of drama, but threatening to triple the rent while Leo's fighting for his life. That crossed a line I can't uncross. It revealed her true character in a way nothing else ever has. What will you do now? Sophia asked, her voice quiet. Before I could answer, Sarah appeared in the doorway. You can see him now. Leo had been moved to a different ICU room, a smaller, quieter space, but with even more machines surrounding him, a dizzying array of tubes and wires. His head was wrapped in fresh, pristine white bandages, his face pale against the white sheets. Despite Dr. Vance's warning about the skull removal, the sight of my son's misshapen head beneath the bandages, swollen and bruised, made my knees buckle. Sarah quickly guided me to the chair beside his bed. The swelling makes it look worse than it is, she assured me gently. Once the swelling reduces, you'll hardly notice. I reached for Leo's hand, careful not to disturb the IV line, and brushed my thumb over his small fingers. Hey, Ty Guy, I whispered, using my special nickname for him, the one that always brought a giggle to his lips. Mom's here. I'm not going anywhere. Sophia stayed through the night, sleeping awkwardly in the recliner by the window, while I maintained my vigil at Leo's bedside. Every hour, nurses came to check his vitals and pupil response. Each time I held my breath, my heart lodged in my throat, until they nodded in satisfaction. Dawn was breaking, painting the hospital room in soft, hopeful hues, when Leo's fingers twitched in mine. The smallest movement, so slight I thought I might have imagined it. But then it happened again. A definite pressure against my palm, a squeeze. Leo, I whispered, leaning closer, my heart leaping into my throat. Can you hear me, baby? No response, but the hand movement was unmistakable. I pressed the call button, and Sarah appeared within seconds, her eyes already scanning the monitors. His hand moved, I told her, trying to contain my excitement, my voice trembling with hope. He squeezed my hand twice. Sarah checked his monitors, then shined a small penlight in each of his eyes, watching carefully for pupillary response. Good reflexes, she noted, a small professional smile forming on her lips. Dr. Vance will want to know this. It's a positive sign. What does it mean? I asked, hope fighting fiercely to break through my exhaustion, a fragile, tender thing. It means his brain is still in there fighting, Eleanor, she said, her voice gentle but firm. And that's exactly what we want to see. As the morning shift arrived and the hospital began stirring to life around us, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the accident. A tiny spark of optimism, fragile, almost imperceptible, but persistent, like the first green shoot after a devastating forest fire. Leo had a long road ahead, an unimaginable journey of recovery, but he was still with me, still fighting, and for now, that was enough. More than enough. The 48 critical hours Dr. Vance had mentioned passed in a haze of monitoring, medication adjustments, and cautious optimism. Leo's brain pressure remained stable, a miracle in itself. His vital signs strengthened day by day, hour by hour. And by the third day after his second surgery, the medical team began slowly reducing his sedation. We'll bring him out of the coma gradually, Eleanor, Dr. Vance explained during morning rounds, his eyes tired but bright with a quiet satisfaction. It's not like in movies where patients just wake up suddenly, bright-eyed and conversational. It's a process that can take days, sometimes weeks. We'll be watching for even the smallest signs of responsiveness. I had taken up permanent residence in Leo's room, a silent sentinel, leaving only when absolutely necessary, for a shower or a quick meal. Sophia, my steadfast friend, brought fresh clothes and took my laundry home to wash, never once complaining. Mr. Henderson stopped by with homemade soup and thermoses and updates about the neighborhood, little slices of normalcy from the world outside the hospital walls. My clients, incredibly understanding, many of them insisting I take paid leave rather than trying to work remotely from the hospital, sent messages of support and patience. What I hadn't seen, what was conspicuously absent, was Clarissa. After our dramatic confrontation in Leo's room, she'd gone completely silent. No calls, no texts, not even messages relayed through mutual acquaintances. Part of me was relieved, savoring the quiet, the respite from her self-inflicted drama. Another part, however, worried. Worried about what she might be planning in the background. On day 5 post-second surgery, as I was gently helping the nurse turn Leo to prevent bed sores, my phone buzzed with repeated text notifications. When I finally checked, I found 17 messages from Clarissa. They ranged from angry accusations, "You tricked me, Eleanor. This is illegal," and a tearful apologies, "I'm so sorry. I was just so desperate. Please don't tell anyone," to practical questions about the property situation. "So, are you really going to rent to me? What's the rate?" The final text read, stark and to the point. "We need to talk in person today." I showed the messages to Sophia, who had arrived with lunch, a healthy salad I picked at distractedly. "You don't owe her a response right now, Eleanor," Sophia pointed out, her voice gentle but firm. "Your focus is Leo. Nothing else matters." "I know," I sighed, running a hand through my messy hair, "but leaving things unresolved with Clarissa will just create more drama later. And honestly, I'd rather deal with it now, while Leo's still sedated and unaware, than when he's more aware, more vulnerable to her antics." My patience for her games had worn thin, replaced by a steely resolve to protect my son and my peace. I texted Clarissa back, telling her she could come to the hospital at 3 p.m. That would coincide with Leo undergoing some non-invasive tests, giving us about 30 minutes to talk privately in one of the consultation rooms without disturbing him. While waiting for Clarissa, I called Jonathan Hayes, my attorney, to get legal clarity on the situation, to reinforce the boundaries I intended to set. "You're well within your rights to evict her given the circumstances, Eleanor," Jonathan advised after I explained what had happened, his voice calm and professional. "But there's a formal process we'd need to follow. It can be lengthy and sometimes messy." "I don't necessarily want to evict her," I admitted, looking at Leo's still form, remembering the brief flicker of vulnerability on Clarissa's face. "I just want her to understand the reality of our situation and behave accordingly, to respect the boundaries." "In that case," Jonathan said, "I'd recommend drafting a formal lease agreement, something we should have done years ago, frankly. It would clearly outline expectations, the rent amount, and consequences for violations. It would formalize the business arrangement." "Could you prepare something like that?" I asked. "Just so I have it as an option, a concrete framework, when I speak with her?" "Of course, Eleanor. I'll email it over within the hour." By the time Clarissa arrived, exactly on time, I felt prepared. Not entirely emotionally ready, perhaps. A lifetime of family dynamics doesn't disappear overnight, but armed with knowledge and legal backing. We met in the hospital's small family consultation room, a space designed for difficult conversations, with its muted colors and a prominently placed box of tissues on the central table. Clarissa looked different, subdued, minimal makeup, casual clothes instead of her usual polished designer ensembles. She sat across from me, fidgeting with the strap of her purse, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. "How's Leo?" she asked, surprising me by leading with concern for him, rather than immediately launching into her grievances. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Stable," I replied cautiously, watching her for any hint of artifice. "They're bringing him out of sedation gradually. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." She nodded, genuinely seeming relieved. "Good. That's really good." An awkward silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken history. For once, I didn't rush to fill it, waiting instead for Clarissa to state her purpose. "I verified everything," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on her fidgeting hands. "About the properties. I spoke with Jonathan Hayes. You really do own them all?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" There was hurt in her voice now, alongside the indignation, a genuine sense of betrayal. "All these years, letting me believe I was in charge, when really you were—" "What, laughing at me behind my back?" "I wasn't laughing, Clarissa," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I was avoiding exactly this kind of drama, this confrontation. If you'd known I owned the building, would you have respected the landlord-tenant boundaries? Or would you have expected special treatment? Late payment forgiveness, free upgrades, constant favors?" Her silence was answer enough. She couldn't deny it. And clearly, I continued, my voice hardening slightly, I was right to be concerned. Given that your first instinct when facing financial trouble was to try to extort your sister, while her child was in intensive care, clinging to life. Clarissa flinched at my characterization, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't. I was desperate, she said quietly, her voice almost breaking. The people I owe money to, they're not patient. Loan sharks? I asked, my stomach tightening with a fresh wave of concern. Clarissa, that's not loan sharks, she interrupted, a flash of her old defensiveness returning. Just private lenders who don't ask too many questions. The interest adds up quickly. I pinched the bridge of my nose, fighting a stress headache that was beginning to throb behind my eyes. How much do you owe? About $40,000, she admitted, staring at her hands, as if the answer was hidden in her manicured nails. The amount was substantial, certainly, but not catastrophic. Certainly not worth destroying our relationship or threatening her nephew's stability. Why didn't you just ask for help? I asked directly, honestly bewildered. Honestly, Clarissa, I would have helped you. Clarissa gave a bitter laugh, a harsh, humorless sound. Ask my little sister for a handout? The sister who always did everything right, who has the successful career and the perfect kid, and apparently a real estate empire? No thanks. My pride wouldn't let me. The old Clarissa was resurfacing, defensive, prideful, utterly unable to admit vulnerability without wrapping it in a protective layer of barbs. Pride is expensive, I observed, my voice quiet but firm. It nearly cost you your housing and what's left of our relationship. She looked away, blinking rapidly, her eyes suddenly glistening. So what happens now? She asked, her voice softer. Are you evicting me? I reached into my bag and pulled out the documents Jonathan had emailed over, which I'd printed discreetly at the nurse's station. This was my offer. This was the boundary. This is a formal lease agreement, I explained, sliding it across the table toward her. 1-year term, $2,200 monthly rent, the fair market rate for the area, due on the 1st of each month. Late fees apply after the 5th, no special exceptions or family discounts, but also no arbitrary increases. Clarissa flipped through the pages, surprise evident on her face, her eyes scanning the neat paragraphs. You're still willing to rent to me? After everything? You're Leo's aunt, Clarissa. Despite our differences, your family, I said, looking at her directly, letting her see the sincerity in my eyes. I don't want to disrupt your housing situation if we can find a way forward that works for everyone, one that respects both our needs. She studied me, suspicion slowly giving way to cautious relief. What's the catch? No catch, just boundaries. This is a business arrangement, Clarissa, not an emotional one. You pay rent on time, you respect the property, and we maintain a professional landlord-tenant relationship. And my debt situation? She asked hesitantly. I'd given this considerable thought, weighing my options, trying to find a path that was helpful without being enabling. I'm not paying it off for you, Clarissa. That would just enable more of the same behavior, more destructive patterns. I saw her face fall slightly, but I continued before she could argue. But I do have a proposal. I outlined my offer. I would loan you the money to pay off your high-interest debts, but you would repay me through a structured payment plan with reasonable interest, secured by a legal agreement. Additionally, and this is non-negotiable, you would need to attend financial counseling sessions and gambling addiction support groups. That's actually fair, Clarissa admitted, after hearing the terms, her voice tinged with a genuine surprise. More than fair, considering what I did. It's not about punishment, Clarissa, I reiterated, making sure she understood. It's about breaking destructive patterns, for both our sakes. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed. A single urgent text notification from Sarah. Leo opened his eyes during reflex tests. Dr. Vance says, "Come now." I stood abruptly, my heart leaping into my throat, a fresh wave of adrenaline coursing through me. I have to go, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. Leo's showing signs of consciousness. Clarissa stood too, uncertainty on her face. Would it be okay if I came too, to see him? The request surprised me. In all the days since the accident, Clarissa had shown minimal, almost performative interest in Leo's condition, but the vulnerability in her expression now seemed genuine, unforced. All right, I agreed, making a swift decision. But if it's too much for him or if the medical team objects, you'll need to leave immediately. We hurried back to the ICU, a quick, silent dash down the hallway. Dr. Vance and two nurses were gathered around Leo's bed. As we entered, I saw what had prompted the urgent message. Leo's eyes were indeed open, though unfocused, blinking slowly against the room's harsh light. "Leo," Dr. Vance was saying softly, gently. "Can you hear me? Blink twice if you can hear me." We all held our breath. One slow blink, then another. "Good," Dr. Vance said encouragingly, a small smile touching his lips. "Your mom is here. Can you look toward her?" I moved to the side of the bed opposite the doctor, my heart pounding. Clarissa hung back by the door, a silent, almost timid presence. Leo's eyes drifted in my direction, struggling to focus. "Hi, baby, fall hi," I said, my voice breaking, tears streaming down my face, hot and salty. "It's Mom. I'm right here." For a moment, there was no recognition in his gaze, just a blankness that terrified me. Then his lips moved slightly, forming what might have been an attempt at "Mom," though no sound emerged around the breathing tube. "Don't try to talk, Leo," Dr. Vance instructed gently, anticipating the effort. "You have a tube helping you breathe. Just rest." The connection lasted only seconds before Leo's eyes drifted closed again, his little body succumbing to the exhaustion of consciousness. But it was enough. Enough to send fresh tears streaming down my face. Tears of relief, of profound gratitude. "This is excellent progress, Eleanor," Dr. Vance assured me, his voice calm and professional. "The fact that he's responsive, recognizes you, and attempted communication are all incredibly positive signs. This is what we've been waiting for." I nodded, too overcome for words. When I finally looked up, my eyes blurry, I saw Clarissa watching from the doorway. Her own eyes were wet with tears, glistening in the harsh hospital light. A genuine emotion, uncharacteristic, but undeniably present. Over the next week, Leo's improvement continued steadily, a slow, painstaking journey of healing. The breathing tube was removed, replaced with a nasal cannula that allowed him to breathe more easily. He began speaking in short sentences, his voice weak but distinct, recognizing familiar faces, and even watching brief cartoons on the tablet Sophia brought from home. The portion of skull they'd removed would need to be replaced in a future surgery, a daunting prospect, but for now, a special helmet protected the vulnerable area when he was awake. He was still my Leo, little by little, coming back to me. Through it all, Clarissa became a more regular presence. She didn't stay long during visits, clearly uncomfortable in hospital settings, restless and easily overwhelmed by the medical environment. But she came every other day, bringing small gifts. A new stuffed dinosaur, a stack of Leo's favorite comic books, a space-themed nightlight that projected stars on the ceiling. "Aunt Clarissa brought you something cool today, Tie Guy," I told Leo during one such visit, 2 weeks after his second surgery. He was sitting up in bed now, still weak, but increasingly alert, his eyes bright with a spark of his old curiosity. "Is it another dinosaur?" he asked, his speech slightly slower than before, but improving daily. Clarissa laughed, a genuine, warm sound that surprised me. She pulled a small package from her bag. "Not this time, buddy. It's a model rocket kit. We can build it together when you're feeling better." Leo's face lit up. "Awesome! I love rockets." "I remember," Clarissa said softly, her gaze surprisingly tender, and I realized she actually did remember. She'd heard him talking about space during one of her rare, brief visits to our home months ago. It was a small thing, a tiny detail, but the fact that she'd paid attention enough to recall his interest, to cater to it, touched me unexpectedly, deeply. It was a sign of a new beginning, perhaps. Later, as I walked Clarissa to the elevator, she paused before pressing the call button, her hand hovering over the gleaming panel. "I signed the lease," she said, pulling the folded document from her purse, the official lease agreement from Jonathan Hayes. "And I've looked into those financial counseling sessions you mentioned. I have an appointment next week." "That's good, Clarissa," I replied, genuinely pleased by her initiative, by this unexpected, fragile step towards self-improvement. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was significant. "I also wanted you to know—" "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on the floor, uncharacteristically vulnerable. Not just about the rent thing, about everything, the way I've treated you and Leo over the years. I've always been jealous of you, you know, she continued, not looking at me. Jealous of me? I couldn't hide my surprise. It was a revelation so utterly contrary to the narrative of our lives. But you were always the favorite, the one who got everything. I got things, she corrected, finally meeting my gaze, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You got strength, independence, real connections with people who actually care about you, not just what you can do for them. She gestured back toward Leo's room, a subtle, profound movement. A sun who lights up when you walk into the room. Do you know how valuable that is? Before I could respond, to absorb the magnitude of her confession, the elevator arrived, its doors sliding open with a soft chime. Clarissa stepped inside, then held the door open for a moment longer, her eyes still locked on mine. I'm trying to be better, she said simply, her voice low, raw with effort. It's harder than I thought it would be. As the doors closed between us, a sense of quiet hope bloomed within me. For the first time in our adult lives, my sister and I might be moving toward an authentic relationship. Not the perfect sisterhood of childhood dreams, long shattered by reality, but something real, something built on boundaries and respect on both sides. The road ahead would be challenging for Leo's recovery, for his fragile brain, and for our family's healing. But for the first time, I felt genuinely hopeful that we all might emerge stronger from this crisis than we'd been before. Stronger and perhaps a little more whole. 3 months after Leo's accident, we finally came home. The homecoming was nothing like I had imagined during those early, terrifying days in the ICU. I had pictured carrying my weak, barely conscious son into the house, setting up a hospital bed in the living room, and essentially creating a home nursing unit. Instead, Leo walked through our front door on his own 2 feet, his space-themed helmet protecting the still healing area of his skull, a wide, triumphant smile lighting up his face as he saw the Welcome Home Leo banner Sophia and Mr. Henderson had painstakingly hung across the living room. My Legos, he exclaimed, spotting his beloved collection exactly as he'd left it the morning of the accident. A forgotten moment frozen in time. Mom, can I build something? After you rest a bit, my love, I compromised, knowing his energy levels still fluctuated dramatically despite his enthusiasm. And remember what Dr. Vance said about taking breaks. Leo's recovery had been remarkable, a testament to his resilience and the tireless work of his medical team, but it wasn't without its challenges. The neurological team had been honest with me about what to expect. While he'd regained most motor functions and his bright, curious personality remained intact, he struggled with short-term memory, became frustrated easily, and tired quickly. There would be months, perhaps years, of outpatient therapy ahead, and the protective helmet would stay until his skull replacement surgery in another 3 months. But he was alive. He was home. And he was still my Leo, perhaps a bit different, but his curiosity, his kindness, his boundless imagination remained undimmed by the trauma his young brain had endured. As Leo settled onto the couch with a dinosaur documentary, his current obsession having expanded to include paleontology, I began unpacking the hospital bags we'd lived out of for 92 days. Sophia had cleaned the house thoroughly before our arrival, even putting fresh flowers on the kitchen table, a simple touch that brought tears to my eyes. A knock at the door revealed Mr. Henderson, holding a homemade lasagna, still warm. Figured cooking was the last thing you needed to worry about tonight, Eleanor, he said, the corners of his eyes crinkling with his gentle smile. You're a lifesaver, I told him, accepting the dish gratefully. Want to come in? Leo would love to see you. The evening turned into an impromptu welcome home gathering as Sophia arrived after school with cupcakes, and even Jonathan stopped by, with a gift card for a meal delivery service, a practical and thoughtful gesture. Through it all, Leo soaked up the attention, showing off his new medical knowledge. Did you know the human brain feels like Jell-O, Mom? And collecting promises of future outings once he'd regained more strength. Notably absent was Clarissa, though she texted earlier. Hope homecoming goes well, stopping by tomorrow instead. Don't want to overwhelm Leo on first day back. The consideration surprised me, one of many small shifts I'd observed in my sister over the past months. She'd been keeping to our new landlord-tenant agreement scrupulously, paying rent on time, and even helping with some duplex maintenance without being asked. Our conversations remained somewhat stilted, decades of dysfunction not erased by a single crisis, but the effort on both sides was genuine. A fragile, tentative bridge was being built. The next morning, I woke to find Leo already up, carefully arranging his Lego pieces on the living room floor, engrossed in building a new spaceship. "Hey, buddy," I said, kneeling beside him, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "You should have woken me if you needed help." "I didn't need help," he replied, concentration evident as he connected two difficult pieces. "And you were sleeping so good." His small act of consideration brought a lump to my throat. Throughout his recovery, Leo had shown remarkable empathy, often asking how I was feeling or insisting I take breaks from his bedside. The ordeal had matured him in ways both heartbreaking and beautiful to witness. Our new routine quickly established itself. Mornings for medication, a hearty breakfast, and light activities. Afternoons for therapy appointments. Physical therapy on Mondays and Wednesdays. Cognitive therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays, with Fridays reserved for rest and quiet play. I had arranged to continue working remotely indefinitely, my clients understanding and supportive of our situation. My income was stable, my spirit, though tested, unbroken. Clarissa arrived as promised the day after our homecoming, bearing a gift bag containing a model solar system that could hang from Leo's ceiling, glow-in-the-dark stars, and planets ready to orbit. "This is awesome," Leo exclaimed, examining the detailed planets with a fascinated gasp. "Mom, can we hang it today, please?" "We'll need to get the right hooks," I explained, ruffling his hair. "Maybe Aunt Clarissa can help us install it this weekend." Clarissa looked startled by the invitation, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but quickly nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "I'd like that." And after Leo went to rest in his room, still tiring easily from social interactions and the mental effort of recovery, Clarissa and I sat at the kitchen table, an echo of many uncomfortable conversations throughout our lives. "The place looked good," she said, glancing around, as if genuinely assessing the space. "Unchanged, I mean, like you never left." "Thanks to Sophia and Mr. Henderson," I acknowledged. "They kept everything ready for us." Clarissa nodded, a flicker of something like envy crossing her face, quickly suppressed. "You have good friends." "I do," I agreed, deciding to extend an olive branch, to bridge the remaining distance between us. "And family, too. You've been different since everything happened, Clarissa, in a good way." Clarissa traced a pattern on the table with her fingertip, avoiding eye contact. "The financial counseling has helped," she admitted, her voice soft. "And the other group, the gambling one. I didn't want to go at first, but it's been illuminating." She paused, then, to my genuine shock, added, "I sold my designer bags and some jewelry, paid off about half of what I owe you already." This genuinely surprised me. Clarissa's designer collection had been her pride and joy, often purchased at the expense of more practical needs, a symbol of the status she craved. "Wow, Clarissa," I said, truly impressed. "That's a big step, a very big step." She shrugged, finally meeting my gaze, her eyes still holding a hint of vulnerability. "They're just things. When I saw Leo in that hospital bed, it changed something, made me realize how stupid it all was, caring so much about stuff and status." Before I could respond, Leo called from his room, needing help with his medication, pulling me back to the present, to my son's needs. By the time I returned, Clarissa had composed herself, the moment of raw vulnerability past, but not forgotten. It was a seed planted, a fragile promise. The weekend brought another milestone, our first family dinner since Leo's return home. Clarissa arrived punctually, offering to help me prepare a simple meal while Leo supervised from his perch at the kitchen counter, offering expert advice on pasta sauce seasoning. As we sat down to eat, the sunlight streaming through the window, I was struck by how ordinary, yet how extraordinarily precious, the moment felt. My son, even improving daily, my sister making genuine efforts at change, however difficult for her, and myself, stronger, more certain of my boundaries, and more authentically myself than I'd ever been. "I'm going back to school when I'm better," Leo announced between bites of garlic bread, his voice still a little slower but clear. "And I'm going to be a doctor, or maybe an astronaut doctor, for space emergencies." Clarissa smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "That sounds perfect for you, buddy. You've certainly had enough medical experience to get a head start. Vance says my brain is super interesting, Leo informed her proudly. He's going to write a paper about it for doctor's school. Medical journal, honey, I corrected gently, a laugh bubbling up. And yes, your recovery has been very impressive. The doctors have learned a lot from you. As Leo launched into a detailed explanation of his upcoming skull replacement surgery, complete with sound effects that made Clarissa wince, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Not just for Leo's survival and recovery, but for the unexpected gifts that had emerged from our crisis. A new understanding with my sister, a deeper appreciation for my support network, and an unshakable confidence in my own strength. A silent power I had finally claimed. 6 months after Leo's accident, life had found a new normal. Leo returned to school part-time, his skull successfully reconstructed, though he still attended therapy sessions and tired more easily than before. His teachers, understanding and supportive, developed a modified curriculum to accommodate his needs while still challenging his sharp mind. Clarissa and I had settled into a relationship that, while not perfect, was more honest than ever before. She paid her rent on time, attended her support groups regularly, and had even started taking classes at the community college, small steps toward greater independence and responsibility. The gambling debts were slowly being paid off, one responsible payment at a time. As for me, I found myself changed in ways both subtle and profound. I no longer avoided confrontation at all costs, having learned that boundaries were not just important, but absolutely essential for my well-being and Leo's. I spoke more directly, made decisions more confidently, and valued my own judgment in ways I never had before. The quiet strength I had cultivated in the shadows was now a vibrant, undeniable part of who I was. One evening, as Leo and I sat on our back porch, watching the sunset, a ritual we'd developed since his recovery, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom," he began, his voice thoughtful, his little brow furrowed as he searched for the right words, something he still sometimes struggled with. "Are you glad about what happened? Not the accident part, but the other stuff?" "What do you mean, buddy?" "Like with Aunt Clarissa," he continued, pointing vaguely towards the other side of the duplex. "And you being braver now." His perception startled me, a child's clear-eyed honesty cutting through my adult complexities. "How do you know I'm braver, Leo?" He shrugged, a simple gesture. "You talk different. Stand taller. Don't let people make you sad anymore." He paused, then added with the simple wisdom of childhood, a profound observation that struck me to my core. "You know who you are now." I pulled him close, this remarkable child who had been through so much, seen so much, and still saw the world with such clarity, such unwavering optimism. "You're right, my love," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes the hardest moments teach us the most important lessons. I'm not glad about what happened to you, Leo. I would take away your pain in a heartbeat if I could. But I'm grateful for what we've learned, for how we've grown stronger, together." Leo nodded seriously, his small face illuminated by the last rays of sunlight. "Like my doctor said, we adapt and overcome." "Exactly like that," I agreed, watching as the first evening star began appearing in the darkening sky, naming constellations he'd memorized during long hospital nights. The journey hadn't been one I would have chosen. The terror of nearly losing my child, the deep betrayal by my sister, the months of uncertainty and painstaking recovery. But through it all, I had discovered truths I might never have learned otherwise, that I was stronger than I knew, that boundaries were acts of love rather than selfishness, and that sometimes the most painful crises led to the most profound healing. Our story wasn't over. In many ways, it felt like we were just beginning a new chapter. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, Leo and I, stronger for having weathered the storm, and perhaps a little bit braver too. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who took advantage of your kindness, or experienced a crisis that ultimately led to positive change in your life? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that strength often emerges from our most difficult moments. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember, sometimes the most powerful words we can learn to say are simply enough.